It's Wednesday, September 24th, and we are about to see double hurricanes form out in the Atlantic, very close to the eastern coast of the United States. This invest that is especially a little bit more west and way closer to the eastern coast is something that we're going to want to watch very closely, especially if you're in areas like the Bahamas and then just anywhere really from Florida all the way up to around the Chesapeake region. This invest that's a little bit more easternly currently has a higher chance of formation at a 90% chance, but it looks like it has a higher probability of just skimming the coast. But there is still a non zero chance of this potentially even making a close pass to the United States. And then Hurricane Gabrielle is now kind of starting to weaken, and then it's really going to start pushing out into the Atlantic, and its impacts are essentially done. But here's a better look on how things will likely unfold from the European model. This isn't something which shows exactly how things will unfold, but this is something that just kind of gives us a pretty good idea of what's going to happen. This is going to be that more easternly invest we see. It's actually going to probably transform into a pretty formidable hurricane and just ride this ridge out here in the Atlantic, kind of swooping around, potentially making a close pass to the United States, but it's actually going to play a big factor in steering our hurricane, which could potentially go through the Bahamas. We could actually see a very rare Fujiwara effect, which kind of happens when one storm gets sucked up by another and they merge. Now, this could potentially actually be good news for the United States as it would steer this storm away, but we still want to stay weather aware, actually very weather aware if you're anywhere really on the Florida coast all the way up to the Chesapeake region. And on top of the potential double hurricane madness we have going on out in the Atlantic, there's actually a really big risk for some severe weather today. We have a marginal which spans all the way from the Texas-Mexico border into parts of Ohio and then the southwestern corner of Pennsylvania. This is mostly going to be for a conditional threat of seeing some 60-mile-an-hour damaging winds along a front in line of storms, and that hail threat is going to be pretty much non-existent. There's also no tornado threat outlined by the SPC, but I think there are a couple of isolated areas along our line where we could see an elevated potential, which we will talk about in 1 second. And this is what the radar might look like as we go into the late afternoon today. We're really going to start to see storms pretty much all the way through the day after midday along a line along this cold front, also brought by a trough. And there's also going to be a couple of short waves or low pressure systems kind of making their way up this cold front, increasing favorable shear for a couple of areas of storms. I think we're really going to want to keep a pretty close look on this entire band stretching from around Houston all the way up into mid Mississippi. And then pretty much anywhere along this low pressure system could just see an elevated threat for the potential of thunderstorms and even a couple of clusters of severe weather. Then the farther north we go, it looks like that threat of really organized severe weather is going to start to diminish as there's really going to be a lack of instability up here, but there's still going to be a conditional threat as our front goes all the way up here. And we'll, of course, still have a couple of embedded short waves with low pressure systems, bringing some more favorable shear to a couple of regions. One region which could see a more favorable risk for potentially all hazards and even a non-zero chance of tornadoes would be in parts of northern Kentucky and then just north of our low pressure system that we saw in parts of Arkansas, kind of near the Memphis region. So definitely still want to stay weather aware if you're north of that, all the way up until around the Cincinnati region. And this is just a better look at that big trough that's really bringing all of our severe weather today. And we can see a couple of areas of increased flow, which kind of highlight a couple of short waves or low pressure systems. That one over Arkansas, kind of near the Memphis region, bringing a increased potential for some thunderstorms along that line, stretching from Houston all the way up to Mississippi and even potentially the middle of Tennessee. And of course, we have that big low center, which is kind of the heart of that trough, which could bring that potential for severe weather all the way up into parts of the middle of Ohio, then even southwestern Pennsylvania. Although it looks like that risk could potentially be a little bit smaller there, you're still going to want to stay weather aware if you're in that region. And this is just a general look of the environment along that line. We're going to have some lower cloud bases and some pretty favorable shear actually for a couple of organized clusters and also for potentially a couple of weak spin up tornadoes pretty much anywhere along our line, but those are going to be especially around those areas I just mentioned, which will have those short waves or low pressure systems moving through. But the biggest thing is that it's going to be a moist enough environment, 70 dew point in a unstable enough environment. We have above 1,000 Cape, which is definitely going to be enough for some thunderstorms and potentially even some severe thunderstorms. And for precipitable water, it's going to be quite high, increasing the strength of our downdrafts and thus bringing that threat for severe winds, and then also potentially bringing a flooding threat to the region. So also we're going to want to keep an eye out for that.